get some interaction going on. I would like to ask you, give you some feedback. I want to know if you have a favorite Nicolas Cage film. Who has a favorite Nicolas Cage film? Scott, what do you got?
Leaving Las Vegas.
What's that?
Leaving Las Vegas.
Leaving Las Vegas. That's a classic.
Raising Arizona.
Raising Arizona. I've never even seen that one. I need to check that one out. What's wrong with me? Aaron's got one.
National Treasure.
Of course, National Treasure. Probably one of his.
That's all.
That's all. Anyone else have a favorite Nicolas Cage film? He's got a litany of them. Most of us probably can't even think of the rest of them. Well, in honor of the fact that who here has seen Left Behind, the new Left Behind movie? Anyone seen the new Left Behind movie that just came out? Nobody. Wow. I'm kind of proud, actually. I was going to say that if somebody raised their hand, you were my first inductees into my official end times rapture theology classes that will be starting next week, and you're going to be forcibly entered into it. But no one's seen it, so that's fine. We can actually just worry about that later. If you happen to follow me on Facebook or Twitter, and I assume a lot of you are on Facebook or Twitter, you know I have an opinion about the Left Behind books and the Left Behind films. And I've particularly got an opinion about the Nicolas Cage rendition of the Left Behind films. I don't know what they were thinking, that if rebooting this already kind of struggling series with an actor by the name of Nicolas Cage, I don't know why they thought that was going to work. I mean, it's beyond me. But it was predicted to fail, and as such, the reviews have been dismal for it. But on Facebook and Twitter, I've had a number, since the past couple weeks it's been out, I've had a number of exchanges about my particular opinion and my particular understanding about the end times and about rapture theology. And we'll talk about that in another sermon series someday, because it's an important conversation to have. Because the Bible has some very specific things to say about it, and I think Left Behind gets it really, really wrong. But nevertheless, what I've discovered in the past, especially the past couple weeks, is that Facebook and Twitter have really changed the world. They've really revolutionized the world. The world is now a lot smaller than it used to be. It used to be that if you wanted to have a conversation about end times theology or about the rapture or about something regarding even pop culture, you had to be in a social setting, first of all. Or if you wanted to read about stuff like that, you had to go to a library or a bookstore. You actually had to buy one of those printed things called books, or borrow one of those printed things called books and study up on it. And usually when you studied up on it, there was a presupposition that when you bought one of these books or you borrowed one of these books about something as important as a theological conversation or anything, that the person who wrote it had some kind of credentials. Right? I mean, usually there's some sort of presupposition that if someone published you, if someone gave you the opportunity to put your thoughts into writing and bound it in some kind of a book, that there was some sort of credentials behind that. Today, with the advent of social media, and the advent of Twitter, Facebook, blogging, all that kind of stuff, anybody who has a computer or a phone or a tablet or even a rock and a chisel, who has a friend who has a phone or a tablet or a computer, can get their stuff online for the general public to read it. I mean, the advent of Twitter and the advent of Facebook and things like it have effectively been like giving every person alive a megaphone and saying, have at it. Just have at it. The world has gotten a lot louder as a result of the inventions of social media. It's gotten a lot louder. And it seems like there are more and more people desperate to be loud, desperate to be heard, desperate to be remembered, desperate to have their thoughts recorded in the annals of history. Facebook and Twitter have become, and the web and social media have become just an open access, carte blanche, blank check access to anything you want. Anybody has an opinion, anything that somebody wants to say can be said. But you and I both know that Facebook and Twitter aren't just for information gathering, are they? They're not just for information gathering. Facebook and Twitter are an endless source of mind-numbing entertainment, is it not? And there are very few things as entertaining as following Nicolas Cage on Twitter. I'm not kidding. If you don't follow Nicolas Cage, you need to look up Nicolas Cage on Twitter and give him a follow. Because what will result is days and days and days of endless laughter. I want to give you, this morning, the 5 best tweets I have seen come from Nicolas Cage. This is going to be fun. So we're going to loosen up a little bit and we're going to have some fun with this. And we're gonna follow along. This is Tom's top 5 Nicolas Cage tweets. Begin with this one. It's official. Do I have it? It's official. I have over 10,000 followers. I'm not familiar with other celebrities on here, but I think I may have broken the record. These are legitimate Nicolas Cage tweets, by the way. The next one. The Sorcerer's Apprentice is playing on HBO. Cancel any plans and you had and watch it. Sorcerer's Apprentice is one of his lesser-known films. Next one is, a day goes by, the birds will fly. There's always time to cry. An excerpt from a poem I'm writing. This is legitimate, folks. This is amazing. This is all you need. Who needs cable anymore? You've got Twitter, you've got Nicolas Cage. That's all you need. Next, just got a haircut at the Hollywood salon. This time I went for more of a romantic, presidential insertive look. Wonderful. What? No idea. And lastly, this is my favorite. This is because I'm a history guy. I often compare myself to John Locke. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and have to remind myself I'm not John. That's good to know, right? John Locke being, of course, an enlightenment philosopher, apparently he gets some confusion, from time to time with himself and a historical character. But hey, that's Nick Cage for you. Gotta love Nick Cage. Here's the deal, though. I brought this up because I wanted to prove a point. If Nicolas Cage can tweet stuff like this and have hundreds of thousands of followers, because I think that's where he's at now, hundreds of thousands of followers. If he can tweet stuff like this, you have to believe that people will follow anything these days. And people will follow anything and anybody, what anybody has to say. People have a voice, people have an opinion, people have a thought, and it will just be followed, it will be retweeted, it will be shared, it will be reposted, and people will just send it out to the world. Anybody who wants to say something can say it, and have a ready audience for it to be disseminated amongst. We live in an extremely loud world in the 21st century. Because everybody's got a megaphone now. Everybody has access to the world around them, just desperately waiting many times to hear what somebody has to say. Like I said before, it wasn't long ago before you had to have some kind of credentials to get published. You had to have some sort of justification for getting your thoughts or your ideas or your opinions shared with the general public. If you had something that was published in a newspaper, you had to have some sort of connection or reason that got published. There had to be a reason somebody was allowing your material to be disseminated with the public. But today, it's not so much the case. Today, everybody has a megaphone, and everybody, seemingly so, most people, want to use it. They want to use their megaphones to get their message out so that everybody can hear them. We believe today that if you are going to be heard, if you're going to be remembered, if you're going to get the attention that you so desire, it means you've got to be louder and louder than the person next to you. You've got to be louder. You've got to be more extreme. You've got to be just taking that one step further so that you will be remembered and you will stand out amongst the crowd in order to be heard, in order to draw the attention that you, for one reason or another, desire. We live in an extremely loud world. And that's why I think the story we're going to be reading from this morning stuck out to me so much more than it probably would have in years past. The story we're going to read from this morning is not a story about somebody who was loud. This morning we're going to be reading a story about someone who wasn't clamoring for attention, who wasn't desperate to be remembered, who wasn't louder or getting louder and louder in order to get what he wanted. We're going to be reading the story about someone who did the exact opposite, who maintained almost complete silence as far as we know for the majority of his life before he was finally blessed in a way that he deserved to be blessed. This morning we're going to be reading the story, which is really the conclusion of the story, of the character from the Old Testament by the name of Caleb. How many of you know Caleb? You know who I'm talking about, Caleb, one of the 12 spies. Yeah, well, we know Caleb. Yes, we do know Caleb back there. Thank you, Caleb, for acknowledging the love. Speaking of being loud. This morning we're going to read really what is his epilogue. The epilogue of the story of Caleb, which we found in Joshua chapter 14, beginning in verse 6. This is what Joshua has to say about Caleb. A delegation from the tribe of Judah, led by Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, came to Joshua at Gilgal. Caleb said to Joshua, "Remember what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God, about you and me when we were at Kadesh Barnea? I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land of Canaan. I returned and gave an honest report, but my brothers who went with me frightened the people from entering the promised land. For my part, I wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. So that day Moses solemnly promised me, the land of Canaan on which you were just walking will be your grant of land and that of your descendants forever, because you wholeheartedly followed the Lord my God. Now, as you can see, the Lord has kept me alive and well, as he promised for these 45 years since Moses made this promise. Even while Israel wandered in the wilderness, today I am 85 years old. I am as strong now as I was when Moses sent me on that journey, and I can travel and fight as well as I could then. So give me the hill country that the Lord promised me. You will remember that as scouts we found the descendants of Anak living there in great walled towns. But if the Lord is with me, I will drive them out of the land, just as the Lord has said." So Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave Hebron to him as his portion of land. Hebron still belongs to the descendants of Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and the Kenizzite, because he wholeheartedly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. For 45 years, Caleb was silent. For 45 years, Caleb faithfully served God, and his people, the people of Israel. For 45 years, Caleb humbly clung to the promise that God had made him. For 45 years, Caleb demonstrated the depth of his character as that of a selfless servant. 45 years prior to this story, Moses made a promise to this man by the name of Caleb. And it was a pretty important promise. This wasn't like promising your kid that you'll get him a Happy Meal tomorrow night. This was a promise that you, Caleb, and all of your descendants will forever and ever have a plot of land which you call your own. That's a big deal, especially at this time. People didn't own land like that. People lived on land, usually controlled by their tribe or their community in this particular day and age, but this individual family in this story was named by God as owners of a particular plot of land that would be surrounded by the nation of Israel. Of course, they'd be part of the community, but they would control their own land. Now, for some of us, it doesn't, it's hard to compute because a lot of us own property, a lot of us have homes, a lot of us live in a place that we can call our own, more or less. So, property ownership in our day and age is kind of almost the standard for most of us. This is just kind of the accepted practice. You buy a home, you buy some land, you live on it, and that's just where you are. But in this day and age, this just didn't happen. This took an immense circumstance for somebody to have land. Either they're incredibly powerful, or they knew somebody incredibly powerful and did something good for that person, and so that powerful person bequeathed the land to them. Well, of course, Caleb here faithfully served God, who was the most powerful in the universe, and God, having a relationship with Moses, spoke through Moses and said, "Caleb, you and your descendants personally will own this tract of land." That's a pretty exciting promise. That's a pretty exciting prospect for you and your family for the future. I don't know about you, but when somebody promises me something, say somebody promises me just a small gift. Maybe I got wind that there's a small gift card coming in the mail for me. I'm checking the mail every day to see when that gift card shows up. Are you not? You're looking for that gift. You're like, I know it's coming. It's mine. It's rightfully mine. It's coming. I need that gift. I'm going to take that gift card. I'm gonna, I don't know, buy groceries with it or something. I'm going to do something with it. But it's mine, and I need it. I want it. And when it doesn't show up for a couple of days, you get a little antsy, don't you? You start to wonder, oh, maybe they forgot. And now you find yourself in an awkward position. Do I ask about it? Do I ask him for it? Do I mention it? And then maybe a week or two goes by, and maybe it was your birthday, and the birthday's kind of come and gone. And let's say it was your spouse. Let's say it's your spouse, and you know your spouse always gets you a gift for your birthday, and they kind of something happened, and it's a week later, 2 weeks later. If you're like me, I get a little answer like, hey, what happened to that birthday gift? Just a couple weeks later. And that's a really small, insignificant reality of life. Just a small thing, a small birthday gift or anniversary gift or something like that. Here we're talking about a man who was promised land that his family would thrive on, that he could call his own, that he could do whatever he pleased with. And he waited 45 years to say anything about it. He didn't even mention it during the conquest of Canaan. We've read this entire book of Joshua. The Israelites have been through every recognizable area of the land of Canaan. They've battled armies, they've conquered soldiers, they've destroyed cities, and they've claimed the entire land of Canaan as their own. Surely at some point in this venture, they've gone at least near Caleb's promised territory. If I were him, I probably, being a lesser man than Caleb, would have said, hey Joshua, you're like 20 miles from that land that Moses promised me. You mind if I just, take off and go take care of that now so I can set my family up, so I can let them be happy and at peace in their own land? No, he didn't even say that. He waited. He waited until he was 85 years old. 85. It's amazing. It's an amazing story. For those of you who don't remember who Caleb was, just a little bit of background. Caleb in the book of Numbers, which is for us, because we've been reading through the book of Joshua for so long, it's kind of like a prequel to the book of Joshua. The book of Numbers is a story in which the Israelites are wandering through the desert for 40 years. They've escaped Egypt, they're no longer slaves, but God has them wandering through the desert for 40 years. And in Numbers chapter 13, it's a story in which they find themselves on the southern border of Canaan. Not the eastern border like we found them in Joshua, but the southern border. And Moses, being led by God at this particular time, says, I need to send 12 spies, one from each tribe, into the land of Canaan, and they're going to check out what this land looks like. They're going to be completely on their own, just these 12 guys, and they're going to go off, and they're going to check it out. And of course, most of you who know the story know that the 12 spies eventually return. They gather the nation of Israel together, and they have a little meeting. They talk about what they all experienced. And 10 of the spies come back saying, it's horrible. It's horrible up there. There's giants up there. There's giants in walled-in cities that just simply cannot be defeated. There's no way we can get through this land. We might as well just go back to Egypt now. There's no chance for us to conquer the land of Canaan. 2 of the 12 spies, however, Joshua and Caleb, came back with a different report, and they said, faithfully, we believe God can help us. Yes, these guys are big. There's big enemies there. There's major cities. We're small compared to them, but we have the Lord of Lords on our side, and we can conquer the land of Canaan if God is with us. God is with us, who's against us? And so for their faithfulness, God rewards Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, of course, Joshua becomes the leader of the nation of Israel. And Caleb gets this promise of land, and he gets a promise, in addition to a promise of land, that he will also survive for 40 years in the desert. Because what's about to happen is that 40 years in the desert is like a cleansing of sorts. And an entire generation of Israelites are going to die as a result of their lack of faith and their fear from going into the land of Canaan. So not only does God promise Josh or Caleb a tract of land, he promises them that he will be one of the few that survives this cleansing period in the desert, that he will thrive, and at 85 years old, he will be a strong man. You know, I'm not very old yet. I'm in my 30s, so I'm getting there. I think I'm classified as an adult by now. But I know that with every year that goes by, even at this age, I'm experiencing that natural decline of my well-being. I know what it means to have achy knees and a sore back. It's getting there. I know some of you are rolling your eyes like you have no idea what you're looking forward to. It's coming. It's going to be even worse. I get it. But for those of you who have maybe a little bit more experience in this aging process than I do, if you were Caleb, And you find yourself getting into your 50s, into your 60s, into your 70s. Yeah, God promised you that you're going to make it through the wandering, right? I mean, yeah, God promised you that you're gonna control this land. But now that you're in your 60s or your 70s, and you have yet to claim hold of the promise God gave you, you're starting to wonder, is this ever going to happen? You're starting to get up there in age. You're seeing at least your neighbors and your cousins and your friends and your family getting a little old and weary, and for one reason or another, Caleb, miraculously isn't experiencing some of that according to the story, but he's starting to wonder, am I going to make it? So the pressure obviously was on for Caleb to look to Joshua and say, please, can I have my land? Am I ever going to enjoy this? I'm 80 now. I'm 82 now. I'm 83 now. The years are getting higher. The days are getting shorter. Am I going to make it? As far as I'm concerned, it took incredible faith for Caleb to maintain his peace, his humility, his selflessness, to go throughout the entirety of the book of Joshua, not ever saying a thing until the end. 85 years old, 45 years later, Caleb finally speaks up. And Joshua's response is all we can expect. Go, get it. Joshua probably would have said it 2 years ago. Go, get your land. You deserve it. You've earned it. You have faithfully served Israel. You have been a loyal servant of our Lord. You have served our people. You have selflessly put the needs of others before your own. You have fought the good fight. Go and claim your promise. Go. When I was a kid, like most kids probably, I'm assuming, I know, mine's only, she's not even 2 yet, but we're getting there. I believed that if things were going to get more fun in life, if things were going to be more exciting, it required them to be louder. As a child, I believed wholeheartedly that the louder things were, the cooler they were, the more fun they were. So it didn't matter if I was just playing horseplay with my friends, at my house. At some point got really loud. Or if I was just listening to my awesome early 90s rock music, it didn't matter, who I was with or who else was around me. It had to be loud. It didn't matter if I was playing video games or what I was doing. The volume had to be amped up. It had to be loud because, of course, louder to me as a kid meant it was more fun. It had to be loud to be fun. So I remember as a child, my parents often saying something like to the effect, I think you've forgotten that silence is golden. How many of you parents have ever said that to your children? Silence is golden. Now, as an adult, as I've gotten older, I know what my parents mean. I love silence. Silence is golden. Silence is to be cherished. Silence is to be clung to. As we said earlier, the world is just far too loud. And so silence is a wonderful thing. I love silence. Silence is golden. But you know what else silence is? Silence is hard. Silence is hard. Silence is hard to achieve, and it's really hard to maintain. Lei Zhu, who's a Chinese philosopher, once said this, we have this quote, "Silence is a source of great strength." Silence is a source of great strength. Anything that requires great strength means it's hard to obtain. Anything that requires great strength means it's hard to obtain. I mean, you don't get a six-pack abs like I have. Just kidding. I don't know. Okay. You don't get a six-pack abs just by sitting around. It takes work to acquire strength. And if silence is a source of great strength, that means it requires great discipline and great work and great commitment. Silence is powerful because it is a challenge to obtain. I want to do a quick experiment, and I mean quick, this is really going to be quick. I have a little stopwatch app on my phone, and I want to use this little stopwatch app real quick in a grand experiment that sounds relatively simple, because, it's only going to take us 20 seconds. I want to practice silence with you as a church, right here, right now, for 20 seconds. I want us to try to sit in complete and total silence and see what that feels like for 20 seconds. Are you ready? All right, here we go. 20 seconds. All right, that's enough. Oh, that was fun. It's especially difficult for me because I'm the one supposed to be talking right now. So it's that awkward thing like, oh, well, there's nothing happening, it's dead air. So it's, like the radio, they never have dead air, or else, something's wrong. We sat there for 20 seconds, and that probably was the longest period of complete silence you've experienced all morning, I'm assuming. Because silence is really hard to achieve. But it's not easy. We already said it. It's not easy, but it's especially important in our extremely loud, extremely noise-polluted world in which we live in. As we were discussing earlier, as more and more people find the tools to make their voices heard, both whether online or on television or radio or print or whatever, it seems like it's more difficult to obtain silence, to cling to silence and to maintain silence. But the thing that I've discovered, the thing that I've really honestly discovered is that the person who maintains silence the longest, the person who can maintain that sense of humility and peace, the person that can control their own ability to maintain quietness in their life, is the person who is oftentimes most remembered. Who's the person who oftentimes stands out the most in your life. In my last church, we had an elderly woman in that church by the name of Nadine Robbins. Some of you know Nadine, Mrs. Robbins, as we called her. And Mrs. Robbins, when I met her in the early 2000s, by this point was already well into her 80s, I guess, by that point. And as an 80-year-old widow, she was the widow of a former pastor of the church that I was a part of. And frankly, I didn't even know that she was the widow of a former pastor of the church. She was just simply a kind of an establishment of the church. She'd always been around. And the thing was, that the thing that made her so influential, the thing that made her so revered in the church wasn't her former life as being the wife of a pastor, back in like the 80s. It was the fact that she humbly and faithfully and quietly served the church for all the years after her husband passed away. You see, when her and her husband moved to Pittsburgh, they started working with this church that I became a part of in the early 2000s. And they raised children in Pittsburgh, and they raised their kids there, and then, of course, her husband had the ministry there. But eventually, their children grew up and moved on with their own lives, and eventually her husband passed away, sadly. But because she had dug deep roots with this church, this community, she stuck around. And so for years and years and years, she faithfully served this church. Well, eventually I became the lead minister of this particular church, and I had to be the person who would proactively go and see her, because by this point she was confined to her own little apartment, and occasionally she ended up in the hospital, but she was the last person who would ever tell you that she needs anything. She would never call, she would never send a message of any kind, she would never communicate with you that she had any needs of any kind, because she was just always worried about everybody else. She was the kind of person who just put everybody else's needs first. And so I had to always check in on her. I would go and visit with her. I'd see how she was doing. And before I would leave, or before I would hang up the phone with her, I would always say the same thing, every time. If you need anything, and I need anything, please call. Please call. And I don't want to be the last person to know. I want to be there for you. You've been there for so many other people. I want to be there for you. But she never called. She would never check in. She would never send any type of expression of concern whatsoever. Except for one time. One day I was in my office, it was early in the morning, maybe mid-morning by this point, and I'm working away on something, and my phone rings, and I noticed on my phone immediately it was Mrs. Robbins' phone number. And Mrs. Robbins is calling immediately because she never called, and I knew I had to answer this call, so I took it right away. Something was up. And I answered the phone, and here's this lady in her mid-90s, I'm talking to her on the phone, and she's got a very weak, and it sounds like an embarrassed voice. She sounds embarrassed by the fact that she didn't call me. And she starts talking, she says, I'm so embarrassed to ask you this, but I was at the store with my daughter earlier today, and we were supposed to pick up my prescription, and I forgot to pick it up. And now my daughter's out of town, I have no way of getting it back to the store. Is there any way you can help me pick up my prescription? I don't need it right now, I'm going to need it later on, maybe the next day, but I need my prescription, and I need someone to go get it for me. If this would have been anybody else calling me, I probably would have picked it up near the end of the day, or maybe I would have got it by the time they needed it. But for Mrs. Robbins, her prescription was on her bedside table within minutes. I responded that quickly. Because when she called, the one time that she called, it was important. And I responded because it was so powerful in my mind that she had requested assistance of any kind that I responded immediately. If she was the kind of person that requested things all the time, I probably would have gotten it to whatever I could get to. But because she asked once, I responded immediately. We live in a world where people believe that in order to be remembered, in order to make an impression on somebody, you've got to get louder than the person next to you. You've got to be louder, more obnoxious, you've got to be more demanding, you've got to put yourself out there in front of everybody. You've got to crank that volume. You've got to go to the next level. You've got to go to the next level of extremity in order to get yourself remembered. Proverbs says it differently. Proverbs 17 says, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. If you want to be heard, if you want to stand out, if you want to make an impression for the Lord, if you want to make a difference in people's life, it doesn't mean always being loud. It doesn't mean always being demanding. It doesn't mean always asking and asking and asking. It means being silent. It means being faithful. It means being humble. And you'll be remembered. A wise person once told me this. He said, if you listen twice as much as you speak, you will be heard that twice as much. Sorry, I read that again. If you listen twice as much as you speak, you will be heard 2 times more. If you listen twice as much as you speak, you'll be heard 2 times more. I would encourage you to ask probing questions about others 3 or 4 times as much as you talk about yourself. Ask probing questions about others 3 or 4 times as much as you talk about yourself. Worry yourself with the mission of God and the well-being of others 10 times more than you worry about yourself and your own wants and needs. Worry about the mission of God and the well-being of others 10 times more than you worry about yourself and your own wants and needs. If we're going to mimic anybody, we need to mimic our Lord Jesus Christ, who on the day that he died, the day that he was sacrificed, the day he was tortured and beaten, Scriptures say he was like a silent lamb before the shears. Through his suffering, throughout his heartache, throughout his pain, he maintained silence, humility, a sense of peace and quiet, because he knew God was with him. And it's that is a big part of the reason why we remember him today. God knows what you need, and others know largely what you need. Our Heavenly Father sees your faith. He sees your selflessness, and he will reward you accordingly. If not in this life, most definitely in the life to come. This morning I want to challenge you to go about this week and try to practice the discipline of stillness. Practice the discipline of quiet and humility. And I'm convinced it will change your life. You will be blessed 10 times more than if you just made yourself a loud, resounding gong, endlessly banging the drum to your own beat. Let's close with a word of prayer.